Turn it on.
Welcome back, everybody. It's been 3 weeks since we've been here. We are on September 12th, downtown Kiwanis, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Flag is in the back, so we'll have one in front of you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll get going here in a second, but I do have a couple of announcements of things circulating. Both Tom and Dick were going around for the banquet. If you didn't sign up for the banquet, which is October 4th, please do so. We need a hard count in a couple of weeks, but sooner the better. The other announcement is I'm going to be circulating a Get Well card for Scott Wallace. I got an email from Charlotte Woods saying Scott is not doing well. How well that is, I don't know, but he's pretty much restricted to his house. So I got a card. Richard will mail it to him and just wishing him well. I don't know how serious it is. And as long as we're on that note, Leonard allowed me to share this. This is Leonard's last meeting with us. He's undergoing leukemia chemotherapy on Monday. So he has other things to worry about and concentrate on. So thank you, Leonard, for all you've given to this club, and we're going to miss the hell out of you. I'll have some announcements after. Ed?
Well, I just want to report that I saw Bill Arthur last week. He, I piloted the MSCR pontoon boats, and he was one of the guests on the boat with the assisted living community that he's with.
Okay.
And he recognized me, but we did not have much of a conversation. But I think it's important.
He's in cognitive decline, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay, I have some other announcements after our speaker, but Corky has the honor of introducing our speaker today. You can pass the mic.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, several months ago on public TV, there was a program about the power grids and weather problems. And I thought, gee, this is a really interesting program. I never took physics, but I thought it was very interesting. So I let Jim know about this, and here we are. Our presenter is Christopher DeMarco, who is Professor Emeritus at UW-Madison, where he's been a member of the faculty in electrical and computer engineering since 1985. He has served as the department chair from 2002 to 2005 and was UW-Madison site director for the Power Systems Engineering Research Center from 2004 to 2018. In 2000, he was a recipient of the UW-Madison Chancellor's Distinguished Teaching Award. He received his doctoral degree at the University of California, Berkeley in 1985, and his BS from Bachelor of Science degree from MIT in 1980, both degrees in electrical engineering and computer sciences. His research and teaching interests center on control, security, and optimization of electrical engineering systems. So let's welcome Christopher DeMarco.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you today. Let me adjust my settings here for a moment. I think I need to turn.
Mic cuts in and out, but just stay with it.
Okay.
And we need it to hear.
Should I mute my microphone? Is that?
Mute your computer microphone.
Yep. One moment for technical issues
Can I
here.
make this bigger?
There you go. That looks good.
Good. All right. Go now. All right, so my charge is to speak to you about the power grid, a very broad-ranging topic, and one I will hardly do justice to in half an hour, but I hope I can highlight some interesting points and raise some issues for questions. I would, as an engineer, be remiss if I didn't highlight the amazing engineering accomplishments behind the grid. And indeed, back at the turn of the millennium, the U.S. Academy of Engineering ranked the engineering accomplishments of the 20th century, and electrification of the power grid ranked first among the engineering achievements in the eyes of the National Academy of Engineering. So an amazing system that spans really a continental scale across the US, into Canada, down into Mexico, likewise in other parts of the world. But I have to point out and maybe raise awareness of some aspects that are not purely engineering, but perhaps more market and economics that reflect policy decisions going back really 30 years now. And that reflects the fact that many of the operational decisions that are made month by month, day by day, hour by hour, down to the minute in the power grid are really driven by market forces that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and others have brought to play. But physics and engineering can't be avoided. The physics and engineering of the grid and what it takes to make it reliable bring in some very special features to the way these markets operate and raise some interesting questions for reliability and ultimately security in the grid. But let me highlight a little bit about the organizational structure. My apologies to those of you who are familiar, but my sense is many lay people, particularly in a state like Wisconsin, where at the residential level, your interaction with your local utility really hasn't changed that much. But at a higher level, behind the scenes, many things have changed in the last several decades. And in particular, at the bulk power level, technically speaking, the equipment that operates above 100,000 volts, which are kind of the very high voltage transmission lines you see, major substations, big generating load centers, those have all been, people will say, deregulated. Better to say a very modified structure of their regulation to bring markets to bear. There's still a central entity that operates and coordinates the operation of that bulk power grid. And in our part of the world, in the middle swath of the US, that is formerly the Midwest Independent System Operator. As they expanded their territory south, they've renamed themselves the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. So this plays a role as sort of like the super utility operating the grid throughout the middle section of the United States. That's its engineering role. And simultaneously, it operates what is really a continuous market buying power from competitive generation sources and selling power to bulk consumers. That might be a co-op, or it might be your retail utility like Madison Gas and Electric. So I want to show you a little bit about this market just to set the stage to show how tightly that winds up integrating with the engineering and reliability considerations in the grid. But first, understand what's being sold, what the product is. Yeah, of course, it's electricity, but in a sense, it's power. It's megawatts, and megawatts over time then form megawatt hours, or at your residential level, kilowatts over time form the kilowatt hours that you pay for. But I think it's to understand the operation of the grid, it's best to think of this as $1 per hour operating cost for an amount of power, megawatts. You know, you turn on your light bulb, you're not asking for so many kilowatt hours over the next month. You're asking for the, let's say 10 watts if it's an LED light bulb, the 10 watts that light bulb demands every single second continuously. And that's key to understanding the grid, that there must be this continuous balance in the power put into the wires, taken out of the wires. So here's a nice graphic display that our friends at MISO produce. This is their geographic illustration of their market. You see the footprint, if you can make out well enough, through the middle swath of the US, Michigan in the upper right, all the way down to Louisiana at the bottom. We sit, of course, in the middle top there. And these are prices you can think of as dollars per hour per megawatt, or in the more familiar terminology that makes it more of an energy quantity, dollars per megawatt hour. So $82 per megawatt hour, $58 per megawatt hour. This is what their market looked at like at 9 a.m. this morning. Fairly uniform, relatively moderate prices. If we translate to more familiar terms, just moving the decimal points around between dollars per megawatt hour versus cents per kilowatt hour that you would be more familiar with on your residential bill, what you were seeing on that map translates to about 6 or 7 cents per kilowatt hour on your home bill, depending on how you break up fixed costs versus the amount that varies with kilowatt. You probably pay something like 13 to 15 cents per kilowatt hour. So about half your cost, you could say, was being attributed to what it cost to buy the energy, the rest having to do with the cost of delivering it. But things don't always stay that uneventful. If we reach back a little earlier in the summer, I have that same screenshot grabbing what was going on the morning of August 8th, a pretty hot day, warming up through the afternoon. And what you see is both some higher prices, and I think what's often counterintuitive to people, and I'll try and say a little bit more about it, time permitting, some negative prices. And you might think, how could that be? But we'll have a little bit more to say about how that works in a moment. But just to show the map, oh, what did I manage to do there?
That's Richard.
Thank you. Here you see some prices reaching up in the 90, almost 100, over $100 per megawatt hour down at the Illinois hub, lower up in western Minnesota. And what's maybe a little hard to see, but in the southwest corner of Wisconsin into the northeast corner of Iowa, a negative price. I was warned I might lose my mic doing that, but I'll risk it for a moment. This is a negative $113 per megawatt hour. And you might ask, how can that be? Well, part of that, again, comes back to thinking about what the actual service is. And I want to argue that the service is power. Even though you pay for energy every month, what's really being provided to you is that ability to keep that light bulb on second by second. And then, not too surprising, at the end of the month, you pay for the accumulated amount of that over time. So kilowatts times the hours in the month, you pay for the kilowatt hours. But the real service is keeping the lights on, power, moment by moment. And that must be matched to demand. That's both economics, so yeah, supply equals demand, but the physics of the grid really enforce that. If we don't match power, things go wrong. In the extreme, you begin to, in essence, pull power out of the rotating stored energy in big generators, and they slow down, the frequency dips, eventually a bunch of circuit breakers open and the whole thing goes black. But to understand this idea of dollars per hour operating cost, even though renewables and other things may change this picture in the future, for the time being, it's easiest to think about it in terms of a traditional fossil fuel generator. Think about a turbine, or even simpler, if you were running your little home generator in the backyard, a little fossil fueled engine. What does it take to produce power? It takes fuel, but think about it, fuel per unit time. You know, if you were running your generator in the backyard, making 500 watts for backup for your house, it would burn a certain amount of gasoline per hour at some rate. And that's the dominant variable cost. How much fuel do I burn per hour?
dominates the cost of production if I'm running a fossil fuel generator. You know, there are other costs, personnel costs, other things, but fuel costs dominate. And if the service I'm providing is so many kilowatts or so many megawatts, there's the cost of your service. Dollars per hour, per megawatt produced. Kind of, if you think of it as in algebraic terms, combine your fraction there and you go from dollars per hour per megawatt, same thing as dollars per megawatt hour. But the other key thing to recognize, and again, not hard to think about if you think of a gasoline engine, the efficiency, how much fuel I burn per hour for a kilowatt or for a megawatt changes with how hard I'm pushing that engine. You know, your car is most efficient at a nice moderate power output level. You stomp on the gas to get more power for acceleration. You actually burn more fuel per horsepower than you do when you're cruising at 55. Same is true for turbines. Run a turbine at its sweet spot, usually about 80%, it'll be most efficient. Push it very hard, less efficient. Let it drop too low, less efficient. So this price varies with how many megawatts we ask for. And the way the market's designed reflects that. Somewhat surprisingly, what the MISO does is accept offers to sell from all the generators at an amazing amount of information, because these offers to sell change with every 15-minute interval. So if I'm a generator, I can change my price. I can say from 9 a.m. to 9:15, here is not just a price, but a price curve. Here's how much I'll charge you if I produce 200 megawatts. Here's how much I'll charge you if I produce 250, how much I'll charge if I produce 300. And that's reasonable, because if I'm a fossil fuel plant, my efficiency is changing from 200 megawatts to 300 megawatts. So a huge amount of information goes in. All these price curves from thousands of generators across the footprint, all offering these prices. And the MISO, in addition to keeping things engineering-wise running, also runs this market, which basically boils down to saying, okay, for this 15-minute interval, generator A, here's how much I'm going to buy from you. Generator B, here's how much I'm going to buy from you, all the way down the line through thousands of them. And of course, the MISO wants to do this to get the minimum price. They are a not-for-profit regulated entity, so their job is to get the best price for the whole system. But that comes with a lot of requirements. They find a clearing price among all these bids, and this is a market in which the last accepted offer sets the price. You don't have to run a market that way, but that's the choice that's been made for these guys. So everybody gets the, shall we say, last accepted bid price, not paid as the offers come in. But that then determines what we often call the dispatch, how many megawatts we ask for from each generator. But here's the hard part where the engineering comes back in. When I ask a certain amount of megawatts from thousands of generators all across this big electrical interconnection, oh, I better check that that actually works. That all those wires that are going to be asked to carry that number of megawatts are kept within their capabilities, because transmission lines, just like the circuits in your house, have a certain number of amps or a certain number of megawatts they can carry. You know, you ask your 15 amp circuit in your house to carry 20 amps, and you throw the circuit breaker. Same thing on transmission lines. Ask them to carry too much power, they overheat. You don't actually melt the wires, but interestingly, what happens is the wires expand, they sag. Eventually, you don't have enough clearance anymore, and you get short circuits to ground. So MISO has to keep all of that in bounds. And then on top of that, where the reliability comes in, they have to make sure that whatever choice they make not only works for the operating condition that I expect to have, but if they're going to do a good job keeping the lights on, they create this long list, the jargon in the power industry, a list of contingencies. Think of it as, here's my plausible list of all the bad things that could happen over the next hour. And I'm going to run, in essence, computer analysis of this choice I'm about to make. Here's what I'm going to ask all my generators to do. can I guarantee that if any of these bad things happen, with that choice of the mix of generators, I'll keep the lights on? So for those of us who write computer programs to analyze the power grid, this was a field day, because these independent system operators run huge amounts of software that are basically all these what-if analyses, first an hour into the, well, first months into the future, weeks into the future, days in the future, and then down, get close to real time, an hour out ahead. Let's make sure what we're about to do, updated by all we know about weather conditions, by what we know about what pieces of equipment are on or off. Let's make sure what we're about to choose is guaranteed to work in light of any possible failures. And of course, increasingly, I got a question before we started, I'll just allude to it. What else might you want to include in that list of bad things that could happen? What malicious human actors might do to the power grid? Somebody takes their 30-06 out to the substation. Maybe you want to be prepared for that too. So lots of market rules, but all conditioned upon what the physics demand to keep this thing reliable. And if we think about it, if we're going to demand exact balance of supply and demand, even updating this information every 50 minutes, is that truly good enough? I mean, how often do major electrical loads turn on and off? Your air conditioner, or even bigger loads, a blast furnace somewhere could go on and off more often than every 15 minutes. So even at that level, what the ISO tells everybody to do, can that really be perfectly right? No. You have to think about it a lot like the thermostat in your house. The MISO is setting the thermostat, setting the megawatts, and when everything's operating properly, the true amount of megawatts, or in your thermostat's case, the true temperature in your house stays close to that setting. But if reality pokes in, if the temperature suddenly drops outside, or in the case of the power grid, if the temperature suddenly goes up and everybody turns on their air conditioners in a way you didn't expect, there are automatic control systems that kick in and bump up those generators' outputs. So they're no longer doing exactly what the MISO told them, but 15 minutes later, the MISO will catch up with a new set point and say, okay, now I've accounted for conditions, I'll catch up. But in that little picture lies, in a sense, our Achilles heel. Operating a big interconnected system like the grid takes good predictions of all the things that could change and make my operating condition change. And doing this what if look ahead really has to become conditioned on not just possible generator failures, transmission line failures, but increasingly, and always true with load, what we demand in electricity is very weather dependent. Well, increasingly, we're making what we produce in electricity more and more weather dependent. Obviously, photovoltaic, wind. And therefore, it's not so much the variability. People talk about intermittent resources. We can live with that. Things can go up and down. We can adjust for it. It's intermittency, and when we get the prediction wrong, that's when we're in trouble. If I can predict the intermittency well, great. I can plan for it, accommodate it. But if I get that prediction wrong, oh boy. And the news headlines provided us with a good picture of this over the last week. Who is our latest extreme weather event? Well, our friends in California. And what they saw was exactly that at the start of their heat wave. They knew the heat wave was coming. They did their best to make a good prediction. But think about translating back to my starting point of markets. What happens when I make a prediction? I try and allocate resources even just a day ahead. And that's the system in California. They make a day ahead prediction, do the best they can to tell everybody, here's how many megawatts I think I'm going to want from you every 15-minute interval tomorrow. But when reality kicks in, if it's different from what I predicted, we're going to change from that. And you've got a secondary set of prices. I haven't gone into all the shenanigans these markets involve, but there's not only my primary price, I have a price adder if you make me change from what you told me the day ahead. All these other things come in. I have a price if you tell me to leave some headroom, that I don't go up to my maximum, but I leave space to increase my output. All these things can add to the price. Well, let's look at what happened at September 6th in California. You can't see the details, but all that matters here is the shapes. These are two different locational prices in California, two different major substations. Horizontal axis is time over 24 hours on the day of September 6th. The black line is what they predicted the prices to be based on the megawatts they were asking for. The blue bars is what they actually got. When they had to call everybody in, oops, we need more from you than we thought. Here's your price adder. Yeah, that was in the contract, but now I got to pay you. And that hard black line at the top, California puts a hard limit. Nobody can go above $2,000 per megawatt hour. Well, remember, we were looking at relatively high prices August 8th in the Midwest and saying, oh, $100 per megawatt hour is getting a little high. Well, here they hit 20 times that. Not for long, but boy, some surprises. And increasingly in the way we've chosen to organize our power grid, these surprises play out in very high prices. They can play out in other ways. California was worried about rolling blackouts. They averted that in part because, customers were willing to turn things down a little bit when needed. The economists would call that an out-of-market correction. Your governor goes on TV and says, please, please turn on your air conditioner. By the way, I'm not going to pay you for it, but please turn it down. And that worked. But will it work every time? Will it work if the surprises are bigger? So yeah, I'll stop there and be happy to take some questions.
You showed us the grid for the mid-continent.
Yep.
Is California, the grid you're talking about, just related to California alone, or is it the grid?
Yeah, very good question. So these market organizations still have not completely caught up with the physics, because in the physics, the US is divided essentially with some minor caveats into three grids. The west of the Continental Divide, east of the Continental Divide, and then partly for policy reasons, Texas has chosen to keep itself separate, which keeps it out from under the heel of Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. But those are the three electrical connections where in principle, anything that happens in the footprint east of the Continental Divide can all affect one another. I remember being in the control room in MG&E years back, and they saw a blip in frequency, and they said, oh, I wonder what happened. They checked it out. Oh, a big plant tripped off in Florida. That's how far the effects can reach across that interconnection. But the organizational structures are big regions, but not as big as that. And California in particular is a little bit, shall we say, kidding themselves, because they're very tightly coupled to their neighbors to the north, into Arizona to the east, and yet they operate their own market. Please.
So when we're looking at the MISO service range, it did appear to sneak into Texas.
So to say that Texas is isolated is correct, but it doesn't obey the exact geographic state border. There's a portion of Texas that still connects to what we call the Eastern Interconnect, that east of the Continental Divide.
But the rest of the
But
state can't get into.
Correct.
Okay.
So back to Iowa and why it was negative.
Thank you.
Did you answer that?
I didn't. You're right. I had meant to. So you put in these offers to sell if you're a generator. And if you're a wind generator, again, I've been corrupted by the economists, there are certain out-of-market conditions. The federal government pays you an energy credit for being a good citizen and producing carbon-free energy. So you collect some money outside of this market for energy you produce, which means that it's in your interest to get called upon to produce megawatts by this market.
Because the more you produce, the more
the government, the federal government will kick you back. So you're willing to put in even a negative price into this market, so long as it stays above that amount that you're getting in energy credits.
So what do you put in?
Minus 30, minus 40. The fact that it hit minus 100 actually surprises me. Somebody put in a very low offer. They really wanted to keep going. The other extreme, though, could be a nuclear plant. Oh, I can't disconnect. So I got to keep operating. I can lose money for 2 or 3 hours so long as I make it up in the other 22 hours of the day. Now, let me get on to some other questions, please.
So, a couple of observations. To me, it looks like if we would work more now on energy storage, we might solve some of these problems that you've just described. And storage, I know, has been very, very challenging. Probably the best one is pumping water up the
Yep.
hill to then let it fall back down and generate energy.
You're
when
correct.
needed. The battery storage has been less successful.
Batteries are expensive.
The other observation is more discussion, I think, needs to be on self-generating, whether it be wind or sun, and how that plays into all of this. And I know you touched on it a little bit here and there, but it's becoming more and more of an issue, I think.
Microgrids, is that part of that too?
Sure. I mean, a microgrid is just an expanded scale of, you know, self-generating on your roof. Oh, shall I tie in with my neighbors and, you know, 20 of us collaborate. So if one, you know, it's the same message as in the big grid. The question is, what's the right scale where it works best? There are benefits in being able to lean on your neighbor. There's also risks. You know, if their equipment fails and you're electrically connected, it can affect your equipment. So there's a kind of balancing act for just the right amount of sharing, but also the right amount of self-sufficiency. Let me make one point, though, in light of that question and then go on. It's fair to say that California doesn't have a shortage of capacity all the time. California, of course, is one of the leaders in photovoltaic, in solar generation. Oh, at 12 noon, they had more generation than they know what to do with. And that will be an interesting picture to think about. And I would encourage this as a thought that historically, as an engineer, and I think as a society, our mantra was the best possible efficiency. And once you have energy that is incrementally free, and wind and solar are, once you build the thing, it doesn't cost you anymore to get more megawatts out of it when it's available. You may not want the best efficiency, you may want the best timing. Take advantage of that time when energy is free. 12 noon is great. Don't try and use so much at 8 p.m. And storage can do that, but there are things even in our daily lives we can do with that. You know, Governor Newsom had to ask volunteers to pre-cool their homes, but you could set up your air conditioning system to do that itself fairly transparently. And even that plays a role very much like storage. But please, let me try and get a few questions before we run out of time. Yes.
Would you like to make some predictions?
Well, it certainly conditioned on how much the materials cost. But I do think, I was a bit of a skeptic of photovoltaic early on, but the prices have come down significantly and the raw materials are basically silicon. So unlike batteries, where you've got some, I think you could say, inherently expensive materials that at least go into the current generation of batteries, the materials that go into making solar cells are not that expensive. You know, a few little things you need on the side, but and if that can be made cheap enough, part of the answer may be just to build more capacity than we need at noon, find good ways to use that. I'm an electrical engineer. I love electricity. I can give you lots of good uses for it. You know, desalinization may become a big one. So overbuild that photovoltaic capacity relative to what you need in the middle of the day, and you get a little extra when you're coming down the hump at night. That might be just as good as storage. Please, another question?
So the move towards electric vehicles, and obviously we're spending a huge amount of our energy requirements on liquid fuels, fossil fuels. And what do you see happening if in the next 20 years we virtually migrate to some sort of electric vehicle predominating?
It's a big demand on the grid. So if it were left without some level of coordination, it would require a big capital investment to bulk up. And a lot of that bulking up would actually be at the distribution level. You know, I've got an electric vehicle I bought cheap used a few years ago. I'm a terrible MG&E customer. Anybody from MG&E? Uh-oh. So I plug in whatever the hell I want. And I know I shouldn't do that.
Well,
But-
I have electric vehicle too. I plug in overnight. Okay, that's not photovoltaic power. But there's been some discussion online about vehicle to grid and vehicle to
Yep,
home.
yep.
Wherein the vehicles could be charged during the day at work.
Yep.
And then at night or at an inconvenient time for the calculations, they could go vehicle to grid.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about that? What are the prospects of it actually happening?
So the things to recognize, you know, if we migrate to a large number of electric vehicles, that is both a challenge and a resource. Because here we've got an investment in storage that is shared with other uses. You know, if I were buying those batteries just to serve the grid, I might say they're too expensive. But if I'm buying them and they can serve the grid and serve my transportation needs, oh, now I'm getting two benefits out of them, it might be worth it. But how does the grid get a benefit? We've got to find a good way for consumers, users of the electric vehicle, to conveniently communicate their preferences. And I think right now, a lot of the systems for that are kind of cumbersome. But if I can find a good way to communicate my preference and build in, you know, enough of the, shall we say, playing the odds that I might change my mind occasionally and say I don't need my car till 8 a.m. and decide, oh, no, I'm going to leave early this morning. I want it done by 6:30. You know, that's some of the challenge. But again, just the California chart tells you the picture. There are long hours of the day when if lots of people wanted to charge their cars, let's take those cheap prices as a signal that the grid has plenty of capacity for them if they wanted to charge. But they sure don't want to charge at $2,000 per megawatt hour. So a lot of that is this, the communications, you know, from the home to the utility are getting there. I think the first generation of smart meters were a little low level. I think we need better stuff than that, but it's doable. And I bought a charger that has all those smarts built in, and I think I paid an extra $50 for it. And all I really got out of it is, oh, I can look at my phone and see how much to charge, big deal. But I mean, that's how trivial the extra cost is in the charger to build those smarts in. And for me, it's sitting there unused.
I'll talk to you later.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna
we
take the
should.
last question. Can you give us 1 minute on cybersecurity and how worried we should be? That doesn't look good.
You know, a truly concerted effort, and, you know, not to get into the CIA's territory, but at the level of a state actor, somebody who really gets to know your grid well and knows its weak points and coordinates a limited amount of damage to physical equipment with damage to these control systems. And here's the bad news about what we just talked about. You know, I put those smart chargers on my car. Oh, what's the weakest link in the chain? It's probably what this little 10-person company who built the computer in my charger did, you know? So many of the things that can do the grid good in smart controls, sadly can also do the grid badly if a malicious actor gets their hands on it. And I'm torn on that one. It's tough. You know, part of me says make it dumb and then nobody can break it. But you give up opportunities.
Thank you.
No, hope that was useful. Thank you.
You're free to stay or you can.
I'll mingle a bit.
We don't have a lot of business, so if people have questions and you're around,
Please.
it's great.
Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you. I'm looking at my list here. Jerry reminded me October 8th is the road, Highway 19 road cleanup. Rain date is October 15th. So sign up is on the website. Other announcements. Tom.
The ACE committee will be meeting on Wednesday, this week, Wednesday, at 7:30 a.m. at Perkins for its monthly meeting.
Okay. Jerry.
Let me add to what you said about the highway cleanup. Only 2 people have signed up so far, and I'm gonna go after the young people in our group too, because this is an opportunity. Yeah, you laugh. This is an opportunity for the 10 people in the separate committee to interface with us and do work with us. And if you look around the room with all of our white gray hair, you know we gotta have these people come on and join us, or we're gonna have to put this thing behind us. We didn't clean it up this spring, so that means we
Might be
may have a
double.
lot more work to do. And hopefully we can get it done without the nasty weather that could set in. The other thing is we have a blood drive on the 29th of September at the Department of Revenue. I have one more spot to fill. Tom has told me he can be flexible and either do the 8 o'clock shift where we've got a spot open for doing the canteen and donor assist, or at 8:30 to 10:30 or 10:30 to 12:30, which is registration. So keep that in mind and let me know, or sign up on the website if you have that time available. Thank you.
Dick and I went to the after hours meeting a week and a half ago, and there were 4, I think, 3, 4. So definitely we can get the after hours committee aware of some of our activities and see if they can join us. Dick, you had an announcement?
Yeah.
So it's that time of month again, actually a week later. 2 weeks ago, we did the Wilmar survey, and this was our annual cookout. So we had a lot of people helping, and we had some good meals. So we did the brats and burgers again. And what else do we have with it? It's been a while here. Also, we had baked beans, potato salad, pear halves, packaged cookies, and some homemade brownies from Co, of course. So, and those helping were Co Williams, Abe Aberly, Meg Galloway, Bob Rand, Jim Nemke, Ken Kosick, Tom Broad, Eileen Nelson, Penny Nallad, and we got it all done. And we served, we had 40 brats and 40 hamburgers, and we served them all. Some people got seconds, but it was a good turnout. Everybody appreciates that. So thank you all for helping.
Let's see, what else did I send out this morning? Next week, we have the WISO and the new building, an overview of their new practice and performance building on East Wash, right? 26th, psychology of forgiveness. October 3rd, remember, no meeting because we have our banquet the following Tuesday evening. So no meeting on October 3rd. And Meg, I told Jim about it, so he knows we won't be here. October 10th, we will verify with Lieutenant Governor Ken Seville that it'll be the swearing in of Meg and Jerry as a board member. And unfortunately, Leonard's situation, we now have an open spot on the board for next year. So please consider giving your name to Meg so that we can have a full board for the next year. The 17th is working in the Ukraine. And the 24th should be a really good one. Doug Moe, everybody knows Doug Moe, is going to talk about the Kit Saunders Nordine, who was the women's athletic director, I believe, and the rise of women's intercollegiate athletics at UW. So that's the end of October.
Let me just expand on the 17th. That's my stepson who's going to speak to us.
Oh.
He was in the Ukraine last week, working out the State Department's plans for further aid to Ukraine. So that's what he does.
Whoa.
And he will be showing pictures of them.
Great insight into what it's like in the Ukraine. So I'm going to be in Thailand, so I'm going to have to watch it online. So please record them.
And that's a reminder that Richard is recording all of these on YouTube channel, and you can go back through today's presentation in probably about a day and
Says so right up in the left-hand corner here.
being recorded. So everything is recorded. What else did I put in? Oh, next week after our regular meeting is our monthly board meeting, and we will finalize budgets, I believe. I went to the meeting with the after hours to give them some information on their budget, and they were fine with whatever we do. Since this is their first year of having a budget, really, so they're happy. That I think is everything. The card you have, so I want my pen back. I covet my pens. It's a good pen. And we have John Esser for the moment of reflection, and thank you, Leonard.
We just leave this on mic here. Okay. In light of the outcome of the football games this weekend, I've decided to keep it lighthearted today. And these are some facts that I have gathered. I'll tell you a little bit about it at the end. But they go like this: the lion and the lamb should lie down. The lion and the calf shall lie down together, but the calf won't get much sleep. Being in politics, and this one fits, I think, today. Being in politics is much like being a football coach. You have to be smart enough to understand the game, but dumb enough to think it's important. Nobody notices when things go right. An ugly carpet will last forever. A Smith & Wesson beats 4 aces. In the fight between you and the world, back the world. Never eat at a place called Mom's. Never play cards with a man named Ace, and never invest in anything that needs painting and eats. The meek shall inherit the earth, but not the mineral rights. And I know that's true in my property that I own. Never go to a doctor whose office plants have died. If you agree with what I said, tell me what you think I said, and I'll tell you what I meant. And that goes with me and my wife all the time. When you're up to it on your nose, keep your mouth shut. There are only 2 ways to handle a woman, and nobody knows either. You can lead a horse through water, but you can't make him float. But if you can make him float on his back, you have something. Don't care if you're rich Don't care if you're rich or not, as long as you live comfortably and have everything you want. If you think education is expensive, try ignorance. You can observe a lot by just watching. And these are all must be true because they're written on a cup that I have at my cottage. Thank you.
One last thing, I got to thank you that was shared from the Cambodia School Project, where Mike, have you been there? Somebody's been out to see them. Dolly, I think maybe has. It's one of the international committees. Dolly's been there. So nice, thank you. And I just talked with Dick about getting our international donations out in the mail. So we will do that, and we are way early today. So if you have, Chris is still here. If you have questions, very good talk, enlightening behind the scenes of the dependency this country and the world has on energy. It's huge. So thank you all. Tom?
Just want to give a thanks to Cole and Kevin for another wild bingo game we had on the first Thursday. Had a big crowd again. We brought lots of people. So apparently they like our pretty faces. That's why they keep coming. And we're always looking for more people to come help us play some fun bingo games.
Yep. First Thursday at Oakwood Village West. Anything else for the good of the organization? We are out of here. Thank you.